Coming up on this week's news, at least one Canadian trucking group is opposed to British Columbia's toll plan to fight U.S. tariffs. Meanwhile, the Trump administration policies could increase the likelihood of tolls on the Cape Fear Memorial Bridge in North Carolina. And spring break hits a peak, and we show you AAA's top travel destinations. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this week's update of all that's coming down the pike. As spring break reaches its peak, the American Automobile Association is reporting peak fuel demand is not resulting in higher gas prices. Overall, prices nationwide continue to slip downward, with the national average off another 4 cents this week to $3.07. Meanwhile, the peak of spring break travel is upon us, with the AAA reporting the top domestic travel destinations are primarily in the Southeast, which has 6 of the 10 top slots, and Florida holding 3 of the slots in the top 5. Meanwhile, Mother Nature should cooperate for those heading south anyway. This week's travel forecast is calling for a pair of weather systems to move out of the northwest and western U.S., bringing copious snow and rain-snow mixes to many areas and rains themselves, reaching as far south as Mississippi and Georgia by late Wednesday, just as another system lands on the west coast. However, much of the south is forecast to remain precipitation-free this week. The spring break vacations peak in the coming days, then begin winding down after this week, although the last of the spring breaks won't be happening until mid-April. At least one trucking group is speaking out in opposition to a plan for retaliatory tolls, which British Columbia is considering levying against American shippers in response to President Trump's trade wars. We told you last week that BC's Premier David Eby would seek legislation to empower the province to respond to increased tariffs in the U.S. on Canadian goods. That legislation has already passed its first read in the BC government. However, the British Columbia Trucking Association President David Earle told CBC News they oppose the BC government's Economic Stabilization Act, which is already being called the Tariff Response Act. Earle told CBC the potential for economic retaliation is too great, given the minuscule benefit that might be derived from such a toll. Premier Eby has said the transshipment fees for commercial goods moving through BC to Alaska would be implemented should Trump follow through on his threat to reinstate tariffs on April 2nd. Tolls are more likely than ever on North Carolina's Cape Fear Memorial Bridge now that the Trump administration has paused a plan for a grant to help pay for a replacement of that bridge. The administration notified North Carolina's Department of Transportation at the start of the month of the funding pause, with the so-called Department of Government Efficiency reviewing all grants. That means that if a replacement for the existing bridge is to be built without the grant and using any state funds at all, the option for a toll bridge is the most likely. The reason is the North Carolina Department of Transportation has already ranked design options for a replacement bridge, and the toll option won. Among NCDOT's top statewide road projects, a plan for the replacement of the Cape Fear Memorial Bridge ranks 9 and has garnered an $85 million commitment from NCDOT, but only if tolling is implemented. Another option, which does not include tolling, also does not include any state funding. In case you missed it, leaders in and around Toledo, Ohio are hoping to convince state leaders to reconsider a plan to build a bypass to help alleviate traffic congestion between Toledo and the state's capital, Columbus. WTVG TV 13 reports Toledo business leaders are hoping to get the Ohio Department of Transportation to reconsider a bypass plan around US 23 into Columbus, which could be supported by tolling. There is currently no freeway connection between Toledo and Columbus. A design plan for a bypass has already been nixed by the current biennial commission, which has not ranked it among the transportation priorities of the state. However, business leaders in Northwest Ohio say it is important that the state reconsider the plan, particularly in light of the planned opening of the new Gordie Howe International Crossing happening in Detroit later this year. And finally this week, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey released video of the completion of a 7-year-long project to replace all 592 of the original suspension ropes of the George Washington Bridge, part of a $2 billion effort to renew the bridge, which is nearly a century old. Port Authority Chairman Kevin O'Toole called the final rope placement the culmination of a remarkable feat of engineering work to completely rehabilitate that bridge. Construction began in September of 1927, and the George Washington Bridge opened to traffic for the first time on October 25, 1931. Coming up next week, we remind you of April 1st toll increases from Ontario to Virginia. Until then, remember to drive safely and avoid distracted driving. I'm Danny Pryor reporting for Turnpikes.com, the Turnpike Authority.